Golden and Associates. Now, from the campus of LMU, here is your host and moderator, Doug McIntire.
We are live on the beautiful campus of Loyola Marymount University. I'm Doug McIntire. This is the Talk Radio 790 KBC Fox 11 Town Hall meeting on Syria. The United States has to make, the American people have to make through their elected officials. Our guest panelist is Kurt Schlichter, U.S. Army veteran and attorney, Najwa al-Qattan, history professor here at LMU, the afternoon drive host, the host of the Larry Elder Show, best-selling author Larry Elder, Feryal, Cherif, political science professor at LMU, Hassan Tweit, who is the president of the Syrian American Council in LA, and Congresswoman representing the 44th District from Southern California, Janice Hahn. Please welcome our panelists again. If you want to watch at home, and immediately following the town hall meeting at 7:90 a.m. at 8 p.m., Peter Tilden will take your phone calls live at 800-222-KBC. I want to ask our audience here to do me a favor. I want to take an insight. I meant to do this at the top, but I have short-term memory. So what I want to ask you to do is, those of you who are in favor of interdicting in Syria, please stand up and say aye so that our radio folks can hear. I want you to stand up so that cameras can see, and I want you to say aye if you favor action in Syria. If you do that now. Don't be shy.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Okay? Aye. Those who are, actually what I'd like to have, if you'd stand up and just say aye also. Those of you who are persuadable, if your minds are not made up, I would like to just get a sort of sense of the room. Okay? And say aye if you can. Aye. Okay? And now, those of you who are absolutely opposed to any military incursion into Syria, please stand up and say aye. Aye. Okay, we'll do this again at the very end and see. Plus, it's a little bit of calisthenics. We do have an obesity problem in America. Okay. Let me start this round of questions with Larry. Larry, this is my hobby horse, and I'd like you to take a whack at this. I don't understand why this isn't Russia's problem. Russia created Bashar Assad. Every helmet, every belt buckle, every bayonet in his arsenal comes from the Soviet military arsenal. They have a navy base on the coast of Syria, and some of the weapons have undoubtedly been moved to a Russian naval base. Why does the world ask us to do this and burn our embassies and kill our ambassadors, and Vladimir Putin gets to go shirtless harpoon hunting?
I don't think Russia really is the target, Doug. They have their own problems with Islamofascism. The real target is Iran. And we ought to be having a debate about whether we ought to go to war against Iran. That ought to be what our debate is. Iran is the top exporter of terrorism in the world today. They've been the ones helping the so-called insurgents use the IEDs against American soldiers in Afghanistan and in Iraq. They have set up Hezbollah. They financed Hezbollah. Syria is the client state of Iran. Lebanon is the client state of Syria. If we really want to get to it, we got to cut out the middleman and have the debate about Iran. The second thing I want to say is, John Kerry has said that this military effort would not be, quote, war in the classical sense, end quote. Pearl Harbor lasted less than an hour. It was an air attack, no boots on the ground. Was that surgical? Was that not war?
Well, that's a good question. Feryal, Cherif, let me ask you this too, again, and I get Larry's point about Iran, and that's what we've seen in the nuclear age. We've seen surrogate wars. We've seen brush fire wars because a direct confrontation between superpowers is too dangerous.
And plus, Iran is, of course, trying to get a nuke.
Absolutely.
One little thing.
But if we are here today, gathered here today, and the American people are asked through their elected representatives to make a life and death decision on whether or not we go into another country, then the country that holds the strings of Syria is Russia. Could you talk to us about the relationship between Bashar Assad and his father and the Russians, going back to the battle days of the Soviet Union?
In essence, the Middle East was essentially divided between clients of the U.S. and clients of the Soviet Union, and Syria, the good old days. And Syria is the last Russian client. In essence, it is the only country where the U.S. has not been able to exert very much influence, where Russia continues to wield a large hand, And the question is it Russia's problem? I think you have to ask the question, what interest does Russia have in changing the situation? If there was actually regime change in Syria, what assurances do they have that they could keep their bases? What assurances do they have that they continue to profit from the sale of weapons? And most importantly, if you look at several hundred years of history, the story of Russia has always been about getting access to the Mediterranean. Right. There have been historic battles between Turkey and Russia about access to the Med, and Syria gives them access to the Med. Russia has absolutely no incentive to change its relationship with the Assad regime.
Okay, very good. Carlos, you want to make a question?
All right, we have a student here at LMU with a question. Give us your name and your question.
Good evening. My name is Rohan Reddy, and my question is...
Where are you from?
I'm from India. My question is more from the American perspective, but does it worry you that if America does choose to attack, you will be left with the responsibility of bringing balance back to the region, like you have done with Afghanistan, etc.? And would you be willing to make the social and economic cost, social by which soldiers, the loss of life, and economic, the investments into maintaining your troops into that region, and if I'm not mistaken, troops from Afghanistan still aren't back. So, thank you.
Who would like to take a stab at that?
I think I partly understand this question, so let me get at part of it. We've had this discussion up to now about the question of targeted strikes or intervention. I mean, most people think that any type of U.S. engagement is going to be limited to more surgical strikes, which would not involve boots on the ground. And if that's the case, then, well, what's the point? It's definitely the case. And there's a certain amount of hyperbole to worrying about the loss of American life. I think the real question, as Larry says, is what's the point? Does it lead to any change, or is it just a way for Obama to show resolve? Is it a way for him to posture? But I think at some point, the real question is, how do you bring stability back into Syria? We ultimately do care about having a stable Syria because it's a problem for every other country in the region. It's a problem for Lebanon, and we've seen in Lebanon historically what it means when you have hundreds of thousands of refugees in other countries. It affects regional stability at large.
Can I add something to that, please?
Yes, go ahead. This is Hassan Tweit. By the way, let me just let the folks listening at home. That was Feryal Cherif, who's with the political science. She's a political science professor here at LMU. And this is Hassan Tweit, who's the president of the Syrian American Council in Los Angeles.
On the ground in Syria, actually, there is a feeling that the shift of the shift of power that coming from Russia to Iran, to Iraq, to Syria, all the way to Lebanon, to the Mediterranean. Now the shift is going to be from Turkey to Syria, to Jordan, to Saudi Arabia, and neither Russians or the Hezbollah or the Iranian, they absolutely do not want that shift. And I think that shift of power is in the favor of the interest of the United States.
Okay, thank you. Let me shift gears here for a second and bring this into the political arena. Von Clausewitz said that war is politics by other means, but we also have politics the old-fashioned way, which is pointing fingers at each other with reckless accusations. But the situation we have right now transcends that. And there is a lot of politics in play here. The normal paradigm that we've been living with for so long of left, right, Republican, Democrat is fractured on this issue. We have libertarian conservatives who are opposed to foreign involvement. We have people progressive on the left who are consistently opposed to the projection of American power. And then we have sort of statists, if you will, center-right, center-left, who are circling the wagons around the president, who threw out rhetoric about a red line and now has been called on that bluff to have to back it up. And I guess the question is has this degenerated into face-saving for the United States, and is face-saving justification for civilian casualties in Syria? Larry, would you like to take a shot at that?
Yeah, Doug, I wanted to ask that question of Congresswoman Hahn, since she's been having all these meetings. It is my opinion that had Barack Obama not made the comment about the red line in the sand, and had Syria not violated that supposed red line a number of times, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I think his credibility is on the line. He fears that his domestic agenda down the road may be suffered. He wants to do comprehensive immigration reform and climate change and a bunch of other things. And I think he feels he'll look weak if he doesn't get the approval from Congress here. But I think we would not be having this discussion had he not made the comment. And I'd like to know if other members of Congress feel that way at all, Congresswoman.
Well, I think you're right. In fact, this chemical weapons agreement that 189, I believe, countries signed on to, saying that chemical weapons would no longer be tolerated in the world, has frankly been violated several times. It was violated in the Iraq-Iran war. By the way, chemical weapons have been used in Syria in the last year and a half. Our intelligence told us that it was used in small amounts, but it was used. So if there was this international red line, it's been crossed many times, and no one felt the need to punish anybody or send a message. So Larry, I think you're right. I think the fact that our president did say that if they crossed this red line, it would change his calculations. But for me, that's not a good enough reason for me. I am not going to vote for war to save anybody's reputation or to save face or to have anybody's credibility be on the line. I'm a woman, I will admit, I wear a peace sign, so you know where I stand. But this macho tough guy that our international leaders seem to engage in all the time is really not how I think we're going to look strong. I think we have a moral obligation to invest in our own country. I think we have a moral obligation to invest in our schools and our education. I think we're going to be strong someday when every kid is educated properly, when we don't have millions of people in our own country who go hungry at night. I think we're going to be stronger if we invest in our bridges and our roads and our nation's ports so we can truly be competitive globally. So I'm the kind of person that thinks morally and reputation-wise, we have a lot more at stake than just proving that we can fight might with might, but that's just my own opinion.
It's Congresswoman Janice. We have a question from the audience. Carlos Amezcua, Fox 11.
I just want to point out quickly that as we listen to the polls that are being taken right now nationally, people are overwhelmingly saying that one of the things that they fear the most is an escalation in the area, that of course war would spill over from Syria into Lebanon, into Israel, into Jordan. And if you in your mind, think of an area the size of LA County and part of Riverside County and part of San Diego County, that's the area that we're talking about in sheer miles. It's only 55 miles from Damascus to Beirut. It's a very short distance. That's why this is a powder keg issue and why people are concerned about an escalating situation in Syria. Having said that, let's take another question from the student here. Give us your name and your question, please.
My name is Brady McKinley and I'm a junior here. My question is to Congresswoman Hahn. You mentioned diplomatic alternatives earlier. Considering the fact that Assad used weapons after warnings from the West and his continuous support from Russia, what diplomatic alternatives do you think he's realistically willing to engage with us at this point?
That's a very good question. Very good question. I just don't believe we have exhausted all diplomatic avenues yet, and I believe I would like to see us take this to the United Nations. This is what the United Nations exists. I mean, this is why they exist. And I realize the Security Council is not going to make it through because of Russia and China, but I say take this to the United Nations. Let these nations stand up and take a vote on whether or not they would bless military action.
Let's pick up right on this. I want to ask a question and ask all of our panelists to respond to this, okay? Because back in the day, Secretary of State Colin Powell went to the United Nations with a very, to me, convincing presentation of why Saddam Hussein had to be taken out because he had chemical and biological weapons and mobile weapons labs. We saw the photographs. I have a BA in English from the small liberal arts college in Massachusetts. I don't know from satellite imaging. All right? So I believed him. And it turned out that the weapons of mass destruction were not there. They may have been there, they may have been moved, they may have been moved to Syria. But the point is, but the point is they weren't there. So I want to ask our panelists.
They were actually sent to Syria, if you don't know.
Okay, well, that's one of the allegations. So let's start with.
That's why we're back to square one. I mean, I want to ask this.
Okay, let me finish the question, okay? Because we're going to go to everybody. I want to start with Kurt. The long tail of what happened in Iraq. How has this changed this debate? Because I suspect that had we not been through 10 years of war in Iraq, even with Afghanistan, which it was, in my opinion, justifiable given the 9/11 attacks, and I think most Americans would have accepted Afghanistan in isolation this many years later. But the long tail of Iraq is definitely the tail wagging the dog in the debate on this issue. Kurt, could you address that subject?
Iraq is definitely the elephant in the room on this whole issue.
Kurt, haven't you noticed that if you look at the polls, that most Americans also believe Afghanistan was also a bad war too?
Well, it was a war that we needed to get into. Whether it's been handled particularly well is a whole different question.
All I'm saying is that the Americans are war weary, not only of Iraq, but also of Afghanistan.
Americans are war weary in large part because the wars were not fought the way they should have been. And there are a lot of reasons for that. I strongly supported the war in Afghanistan. I strongly support the war in Iraq. I'm proud that the United States overthrew that dictator. I'm glad to see he hanged. Someday I hope to see Assad get the same fate. Let's not misunderstand Assad as an enemy of the United States. And I hope that someday he joins Gaddafi and Saddam in hell. But right now, that is not in America's interest. We have to be very clear-eyed and very focused. What is in the interest of the United States? And I have to tell you, it is not in having an unknown group that includes Islamists take over an important central country. I'd rather have them fighting each other.
Najwa al-Qattan, could you address the legacy of Iraq in the context of the Syrian debate?
Yeah, I think that we all agree that that the Iraqi war and the context leading up to it really haunt this question. I also think that another thing to consider, which is also out of the Iraq war, and of course every other war in history, is that wars are very unpredictable. Even when people know, or leaders know, why they're starting them, even when they insist that they have clear objectives, it's like a wild animal, and it can go out of control, and this is one consideration to take. And even if you want to think about the credibility of the United States or Obama as a serious reason, which I do not think is a good reason to go to war, I would also suggest that credibility might in fact really suffer if things go really out of hand in the Middle East, if the war spills out of Syria into between Hezbollah and Israel, or Israel and Syria, and so on. And I would also add finally that U.S. credibility, at least in the region, has long suffered, and I would also blame Obama for it, as well as W. Bush before him, in terms of, for example, waiting until the last minute to support the Egyptian revolution, in terms of not intervening in Bahrain because our friends the Saudis did not want us to, in terms of totally failing at resolving the Palestine-Israel conflict and so on. So even the credibility argument doesn't really make sense, but most of all, the war, the strike could unleash consequences that nobody can control, and then everybody suffers.
Larry, that was Larry, this is a fastball right down the middle, the Iraq war, and where do we go forward from here?
Well, you are right that the Iraq war hangover is what's causing us to have so much doubt. But I think it's because we've drawn the wrong lesson from that. And the lesson that most people have is that the intelligence was wrong. The intelligence was not wrong. All 16 of our agencies said that Saddam Hussein had stockpiles, and they said so with the highest level of confidence. It was a 15-month run-up to the war. I spoke to the number 2 general in the Air Force of Iraq, George Assad, and he told me that stuff was taken out by plane and by land. I'll tell you somebody else who believes that. The National Director of Intelligence, James Clapper, also has said publicly that he believes the stuff was taken out of Iraq and moved to Syria on some kind of pretext. So I don't think the intelligence was wrong. And therefore, in my opinion, we ought not be comparing Iraq as a, quote, failed effort and saying, therefore, Syria is going to be a failed effort. Syria might be a failed effort, but not for the reason of Iraq.
Okay, let's go. Thank you, Larry. Let's talk to Feryal Cherif, political science professor at LMU, the long tail of the Iraq legacy.
I think the Iraq legacy is that Americans are not weary of war. Americans are weary of failure. If we had won in Afghanistan, if we had success in Iraq, Americans would be much more on board with intervention if we thought we could do it and do it well. People would be on board. It's that we don't think that we know how to do it, that we're not committed enough, or perhaps that we, again, just don't actually know what to do to actually fix the problem. I'd also say that it's not just Americans who are leery of what happened in Iraq. Syrians are also very leery of regional conflicts that they've seen. They see the instability, and this is one of the reasons that many Syrians have sat on the fence. They neither support the government nor do they support the rebels. They simply want life to resume. It seems very unlikely that will happen without some kind of exogenous change, but that is one legacy that not